gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. Today I sat down with my friend Marta. I met Marta at the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. She came down as a yoga teacher, and she started running a lot of workshops where she combined yoga and different practices with the plant medicine work. She has a really interesting story. She has a really diverse background of working with different modalities: yoga, meditation, pranayama, traditional Chinese medicine. And I think she does a really good job at bridging all of those things, combining them and working with plant medicine with those as an integrative and supporting modality. So if you have any interest in yoga, plant medicine, alternative therapies, she has a really beautiful perspective, and I really enjoy talking to her. So I think you guys will enjoy the show. As always, if you're listening on YouTube, if you can hit the subscribe button, and if you can go on Apple Podcasts and leave a starred rating and a review, that would really help in getting this show out. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Marta. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Hi everyone.
So you're coming from Portugal now.
I am in Portugal, yes.
Yeah.
And I was actually thinking about our social distanced coffee that we had in Lima, how incredibly ridiculous and funny it was.
Yeah.
You know, having a coffee but sitting at opposite kind of tables. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. And that was one of the few cafes that was even open. Most were only for delivery, and really strange. I mean, even cash wasn't allowed. Almost all of the places I went to, you had to use, here it's called Yappa. It's like a phone app that you can pay electronically or bank transfer.
Yeah.
Which was so strange, like doing a bank transfer to pay for a cup of coffee. It was.
I think every country has some quirks. What we are noticing about Portugal is that a lot of people drive in the car by themselves, windows are down, and they're wearing a mask.
Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately here, I don't know if you saw, but I think, I mean, it's been said Peru has had the strictest lockdown of any country. And just recently came out that also Peru now has the highest excess deaths of any country in the world.
Yeah.
So, but it seems like things are changing. It seems like October, I think things are starting to open up, probably to a large degree. Some was that information, those articles that were published. Well, cool. So some people may be familiar with you, probably most people aren't. So who are you? You're a yoga teacher. I met you at the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, Temple of the Way of Light. That's how we met. And you came down there leading. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can talk more about it. I'm not sure actually how you came down there the first time. Was it to teach yoga or was it to actually work with plants?
So yes, I am a yoga teacher. But I like to say really that I'm a space holder, because the tools and practices that I do share and that I do bring to people essentially all offer a safe space to meet ourselves, to go inwards. And so for me, it's not really me teaching anyone anything they don't know. It's me offering a safe, accessible space for them to rediscover and re-remember what already has been known or, hidden, understood within. And I think within that, Eastern philosophies and practices are incredible. So yes, yoga is a huge part of what I have been sharing. I'm also a breathwork facilitator. I have been running my own retreats over the years. So that has been really my main pillar of work. I know over these last 12 months, I have been working with a lot of people one-on-one, mentoring them. So my journey and my path and my service and my work has really transformed over the years. I think it's its own living being. And I did come to the Temple of the Way of Light for the first time to teach. So I have never been there as a guest. I was offered an opportunity to come and share, and kind of, ended up staying in Peru for many years, as happens to most people, I think. um, yeah, so I have taught there on the deep immersion retreats. I hosted some of my own programs in the center too. But it's really amazing to me to see how this path of service or sharing any type of mind body practices can be so flexible and so adaptable. And I think for myself and for many of my friends within this field, I'm not going to say industry because for me that doesn't really gel well, but within this field, COVID and all these circumstances of lockdown and Zoom and internet have actually been incredibly wonderful. I felt so many more people wanting to come and wanting to listen and wanting to drop in and get in touch with themselves because things were simmering. And I think that it's really beautiful that yoga can be taught through a screen, or breath work can be practiced without the facilitator in a room, or, there are many ways in which we really can come into a place of self-inquiry regardless of the teacher or space holder being on the other side of the screen. So there's definitely been a blessing in disguise for me. And I was really moved by how many people were suddenly banging on my door saying, I need something, I'm going crazy. Yeah.
So how did you come to yoga? Was that something you were always interested in, or something happened and you found it and
Mm-hmm.
it had kind of a revelatory
Yeah.
effect on your life?
I mean, within my, let's say, today's formed belief system, I do believe that I have lived many lifetimes in India, just based on how I have always felt so drawn to it, so familiar of it. And even as a child, I was deeply drawn to Buddhism, to India, to Hinduism, to kind of, South Asian ways. And I did go to my first yoga class, I think when I was 14 or 15. And immediately there was this sense of resonance and recognition, and my body was very flexible, and I kind of, went right into it. But then I was a teenager, and, I got distracted by teenage things, and life happened and rerouted me away from this practice until I got clean from substance abuse and went to Bali for many months. And while in Bali, splitting my life between going to 12-step meetings and going to yoga practices, realized, wow, this is this thing that I loved so much that makes me feel so deeply connected to me and feel so good. And it became really a pillar of my recovery and my sense of reconnecting with myself.
Mm.
And so it has been there ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So there was a period in your life where you were having addiction issues, or
Mm.
and you
Yeah.
and yoga kind of helped you to come out of that?
Well, I think what yoga helped me with, so I think for me, addiction in general throughout life as a teenager and then a young person manifested in different ways, and that maybe first playground of food, which I think many women can resonate with, our first way of fixing how we feel is restricting food or binging. Like that was there for a few years. But yeah, I went into substance, and it didn't last very long. It was just a few years, just quote unquote. It was a few years, but a very dramatic few years. And a lot of things fell apart, and I caused myself a lot of trouble and burned many bridges. And it was really after I got clean that I went back to yoga. And so what that did for me is not only facilitated a really welcome space for starting to thaw my emotional body and name my emotions that I have been really disconnecting from with substance, but also healing the relationship with my physical body, which was always difficult or challenging. And food disorders and eating disorders, make it really confusing. Um, and emotions like shame or anger or resentment or guilt also make it really difficult to feel at home in your own body. So I think yoga was an incredible tool in rediscovering what it means for me to live in my own body and to befriend it all over again.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these days, I'm sure most people are familiar with yoga. Probably
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people listening practice yoga. How would you describe yoga? What is yoga for you? Because there are so many different ways of looking at it and different ways of
Mm-hmm.
practicing.
Hmm. Wow, that's a beautiful question, and no one has ever asked me that, so I need to take a minute to just think about it. Um, I think for me, it's a path of remembering, of using my body and my breath as tools of coming back home to myself. And
Mm.
within that coming back home to myself, remembering that perhaps there's something more universal outside of my individuality or within my individuality. And so yoga, I feel, can be laying on the floor and just breathing. The movement, yes, is there. And traditionally, in the yogic point of view, we are preparing the body for prolonged periods of sitting. You know, we're purifying, we're recalibrating our energetic body. We're also opening so it's possible to sit. But actually, the ultimate place of arrival is the one where you can just be in your seat and close your eyes and go inwards, or be with life by being fully present. And I can really see that the yogic practice is an invitation moment by moment to show up for life as it is, away from, you know, what we call samskaras, these filters of our likes and dislikes and our attachments and aversions. So I find in this practice, I'm better equipped to be with life as it is, be in my body as it is, be with myself as I am, forgive myself and if I'm not perfect, embrace myself if I am thriving. And yeah, ultimately, I feel I arrive at this place where I remember that there is something larger than me. So this quest of me, and everything about me becomes a little quieter and more subtle. And there is a sense of leaning back into this universe within or outside, right? But something that's felt. And I feel that with practices like yoga or breath work, because over time we do learn how to connect with our subtleties and connect with our inner landscapes, it almost becomes visceral that there is so much more, or it does become visceral, that there is so much more than our intellectual understanding of who we are. It's felt when you're electric and you're, you know, tremoring or vibrating. I think that's why also plant medicine is so wonderful. All these tools bring us back into this place of, wow, okay, there's much more out there than I would ever comprehend. Maybe I don't know anything. Great, let's start from scratch. Hmm.
It's interesting because I started practicing yoga, I think it was in 2002 when I moved to New York.
Mhm.
And there were some studios, but very few. And I ended up going to the studio actually because there was a girl there I liked. But they also
Mhm.
had this karma yoga program where you could do different things in exchange for yoga classes. But I remember, I mean, the yoga classes, the place I was going to, it was part of the LGBT center, and they were doing a lot of work
Mhm.
with AIDS patients. But I would remember classes would be like 3 people, 4 people. And I felt very strange being there because I was like a relatively young guy and the classes were very slow. And um, I mean, I remember even at that time, I mean, I guess people had heard of yoga, but very few people were practicing. It was also really funny because when I started doing jujitsu, like all of the guys would make fun of me, like, "What are you doing? Like that's ridiculous." And yet slowly they started seeing the benefits of that, the flexibility, the strength.
Mhm.
And now even like in the jujitsu world, it's a really big thing. Um, but these days, I mean, before I left New York, I would go to a yoga studio and there could be like 70 people in the class. So
Wow.
even just in my life between 2002 and 2013 or something, there was a huge explosion. So,
Yeah.
and even medically, I mean, I think at that time, very few doctors would recommend yoga or even kind of talk about mind body connections.
Mhm.
Why do you think yoga has really become so popular? I mean, because now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Who knows,
Yeah.
trillion-dollar industry. I mean, everybody knows of yoga. So many people practice.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, obviously, people are reaping the benefits of that. But why
Yeah.
do you think there's really been this explosion of yoga recently?
Mm. I feel like there are so many elements to it. And part of it perhaps is that it's one of those practices that can be molded into what you're ready for. And so if you want it to be a workout, you go into a class and you sweat for an hour and you're wearing whatever outfit that makes you feel like you fit in, and it's great. It serves a purpose. And if you feel that it's an entry to a community, then it also probably can meet that need. Or if you feel that this can be a practice that you want to make the most important part of your life, then it perhaps can also facilitate a sense of personal transformation or evolution. So it's something that is so individual and adaptable and moldable that I think we all can find our own feet within an environment that means something completely different to every person. So in a room of 70 people, you can have someone who's really just coming to feel fit, and you can have someone else who's really working on their anger, and yoga feels like it's a practice where it comes up, or the body is at least somehow feeling lighter, processing emotions. And so perhaps that's the element of that there are no imposed rules unless you go specifically to an ashram or to a lineage where things are a particular rigid or traditional way, and that's just how it is. Which I feel becomes this gray area where perhaps in the West we tend to take things. We like some of it, so we keep it, and then we don't like the rest, or it takes too much time to learn it, to understand it, to integrate it. And so then we chuck it away, or we just, modify, and then we run with it and we create this our version of the thing, which perhaps has happened to the yoga industry, is happening maybe to plant medicine world. Just the very fact that yoga is an industry, or that wellness is an industry, I think that's really ironic and very reflective of where we are at as a civilization, that spiritual practices become industries. But maybe that. I also think that perhaps there is something in human beings that there is that spark of remembrance. We do crave connection with something larger than ourselves, whether we understand it or not. But I feel that it's part of human nature to want to remember spirit, to want to reconnect with that. And we all connect in those moments of sunset or full moon, or incredible nature. And I feel that yoga is one of the practices where it can be felt. Wow, there's this spark, there's this something more. And perhaps as beings, we are drawn to that moment, that split second where everything goes quiet.
You mentioned this idea of traditions, and some things
Mm-hmm.
are being lost or taken maybe out of
Mm-hmm.
context. What do you think those things are?
Well, I feel personally I was always very lucky to study with teachers, even when I lived in a big city like London, who were very, very focused on scriptures and on study of the scriptures, and on understanding that yoga is not just the movements of the body or getting into some complicated asanas where your ankle is somewhere above your head. And so I understood that there is this depth and essence to the teaching, and that the teaching is really not about what you can do with your body. And it was going to India and living in India for a few years and having an incredible teacher with whom I sat and studied Vedanta, that showed me how yoga really is this path that's perfectly laid out for us. And again, it's up to us how we thread it, how far we walk it. But all the little pointers along the way are there. And for me, again, it's a path of remembering. We all come to a different conclusion what it is that we remember, but we unpeel what's perhaps untrue, not really feeling good, no longer useful, and arrive at that place of, okay, perhaps this is really who I am. I remember who I am, and maybe aligning a little bit more clearly with that personal truth. And I feel that is lost often. If you go to a class that's taught in a very busy city, and the class is just 45 minutes and it's really in and out, handstands and very complex things that focus on getting the body strong and flexible, or classes or methods that focus on pushing the body as far as possible, maybe there isn't really any space to allow ourselves to be just as we are. And in the process of allowing ourselves to be just who we are, unraveling all that we aren't, and coming into that place of greater peace and greater ease. And with that, maybe dropping a little bit deeper within ourselves. I think that this very pushy, fiery, masculine edge that's often given to yoga completely misses the point of what this practice can be. Just this very intimate communion with ourselves.
Why do you think there is so much focus on the physical aspect? Because obviously yoga is, I mean, it's so many things, and
Yeah.
it does seem like there's a real emphasis on the physicality. Is that just a
Mm-hmm.
product of how it's been taught, or a need that most people perhaps aren't physical and they need that in their lives to find balance?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think there is so much focus on
Yeah.
that?
I mean, it is also a physical practice, but out of the limbs of yoga, the physical part is just one. And I feel for many people, perhaps it's the first place to access. We all have our bodies. We all need to move our bodies. We probably all need to move them a little bit more to stay healthy. And this is definitely a wonderful practice for suppleness of the spine and joint mobility, etc. So it is hugely beneficial, and it can be a really safe access place into something more. And perhaps that becomes like the first way of engaging with the depth, especially if you're someone who has never done any self-inquiry or has never practiced anything that could be labeled as spirituality. It may feel overwhelming or intimidating to go into a room and start to chant something that you don't understand and think is a worship of some foreign god. And so this is a nice safe space to see how it feels. But I feel that the emphasis of it is a reflection of how we are also as a society at large, especially in the West. It's about achievement. It's about going as far as you can. It's about pushing yourself. It's about proving to yourself that you're worthy by, seeing this great improvement or being better than. And it is a practice that can be taken there. And especially in methods that are so incredibly oriented on the most complex postures, there is an element of competition between students and being the kind of the best one or the favorite of the teacher. And, very few people within that environment, I think, can resist the temptation to like keep pushing yourself, because that's just the energy of more and more and further. And is that useful? And is it really helpful? And is it even healthy for the physical body um, to be completely, wrapped up in a 20 pretzels? So I think it's reflective of how we move through life more and faster. And there has to be this gratification. And one of the practices of yoga that I have been teaching, have been trained in, is yin yoga, which is a very modern practice. It's a way of working with joints and connective tissues instead of the muscles. And it was a practice created, I think, late in the 90s, from the recognition that if we are only continuously working with the yang parts of the body, so the muscles, we are never really bringing the suppleness into our joints. And the joints over time also stiffen and start to tighten. And so this practice is honoring the principles of traditional Chinese medicine, the lines of energy meridians throughout the body, and predominantly works with the lower body in postures that are held between 3 to 20 minutes. And the intention with that soft, strong, steady hold in stillness is to apply intentional pressure into the acupoints of particular energy line. And so we are bringing suppleness into joints, kind of like teeth. It takes a while before your teeth move into place with braces. And so by repeating postures, let's say once a week for 3 minutes, you are working your joints in a safe, intentional manner. But in this practice, you have to be willing and ready to be still for 3 minutes. And it's been really incredible to see people who, for example, would come to a retreat that I'm hosting, and the practice in the morning is a bit more moving and flowing, and then there is yin in the afternoon. And they just don't know what to do with themselves for those 3 minutes, because it feels like they're not doing anything, nothing is happening. Something should be changing, but nothing is. And that, I guess, an ability to sit with self is also very telling of the Western society. We are, I feel, very much encouraged not to drop into self-inquiry, not to pause, not to be still. It's almost counterintuitive. And so, yes, we crave movement, and yes, we crave 20 handstands because it perhaps feeds this feeling of I'm doing something with myself.
Yeah, great. So what else would you be focusing on or emphasizing in a traditional Marta yoga class?
um, that has also grown over the years and evolved. And over the past, I guess, 3.5 years, ever since I have arrived in Peru and have gone much more deeply into my own studies with plant medicines, I have been really fascinated with somatic practices and with feeling the body from inside of the body and finding that connectedness between unprocessed embodied emotions, experiences, and how we can engage and interact with that through gentle movement, through attention, through the breath. Lately, I'm super fascinated with practices like neurosomatic mindfulness, where we intentionally engage with mindfulness practices to create new neural responses from the brain and to create new neural pathways. Um, I think the neuropsychology and the developments of the brain are incredibly fascinating, and it all seems to be coming down to the same place of everything that we have ever been through is remembered on the cellular level and is somewhere in our brains, and we can access both by working with both. And I think many psychologists are arriving at a place of recognizing that to disconnect the body from the healing makes the healing incomplete. Therapy is amazing, but it's never really fully it if the body is just sitting there talking. And vice versa. I feel like the body can be so useful in movement therapies, but there has to be an element of self-inquiry. And so my teaching over the years has been inspired by, I guess, where I have been at in my own process. And as I started to do different trainings, or as I started to find different tools that have helped me, I became more inspired to include them in what I share. So if you were to come to my class, I would probably typically start with meditation, with breath, with a real moment of dropping in, and a lot of somatic practices to feel what's happening in the body, from inside of the body, underneath the skin. And then just some small, soft movements, and really bringing the students into a place of moving from their center and moving from what feels true and needed and useful in the moment. And what I have been noticing is that very few of us understand or even know what that means. How do I want to move? Where do I want to move? What feels good? And that's another fascinating thing, perhaps, about our society. You know, when put on the yoga mat and told, do what you want to do, that will feel good for you, a lot of us have no idea what that means.
Mm. You were talking about this idea of mind-body connection, and even in more Western medicine, that I think was something that was really overlooked for a long time. But that really seems to be at the forefront of a lot of even Western models of looking at medicine now. So if someone is coming to a yoga class, or your yoga
Mm-hmm.
class, and you mentioned this idea of all of these things that happen to us, they can be stored not only in our psyche, but actually in our body as well.
Mm-hmm.
What is the process of, is it that that thing is worked out through yoga, that there's a resolution, or there's insight into it, or
Mm-hmm.
physically it's somehow released from our body or from our mind? From your experience, what is going on there that's helping with that?
I think all of those things, perhaps. There is a wonderful book, The Body Keeps the Score, and the author has explained really beautifully. I mean, he is a neurologist amongst other disciplines. But he explained how we can look at our body as a map of all of our life, and every single experience, good or bad, is remembered on a cellular level. Our nervous system responds to everything that's happening and remembers everything that's happening, even if there isn't a cognitive conscious remembering. And so yoga can bring things up. We can find ourselves suddenly in the middle of the practice sweating with fury, with irritation that seems to be projected at the teacher because the teacher is so annoying, or, the food is so itchy and this is irritating, but actually turns out to be an emotion that's coming up. Um, Yoga can be a space where, having opened up a little bit more energetically, we access the emotional body, and maybe at the end of the practice, where we have this quiet inquiry space of Shavasana, we have an emotional release. So many people just cry at the end and they have no idea why they're crying, and yet something within them is asking for attention, wants to be expressed. It can also be a practice perhaps where we get to know ourselves better. There is this moment in every shape where there is nowhere to go. We have to be here with our urges to get to the next shape, with our comparison with other people, with our impatience, with our distractedness, or maybe with our sense of being so present and connected. And that changes breath by breath and moment by moment and shape by shape. And an hour, 90 minutes of a practice can be like this most incredible encounter with yourself. And for me, it's like a mirror practice where I come on my mat, especially if I feel upset or frustrated or something is going on for me. A container to touch myself in a way that's, I guess, welcoming, because it's just the space of a mat. Anything can happen. And so if you are practicing without agendas, without need to push or achieve anything physically, this can be the most beautiful communion with yourself. And perhaps in that process of showing up for who we are in a moment, we find greater ease with what's present for us, a sense of compassion for our processes or for our neurosis or for the intensities that we may be going through. And at the end of each practice, I personally feel just a little bit more connected to me. And if I have been connected through the whole practice, I am reminded that this is a space that always waits for me, even if just for 5 minutes, where I can safely tend to whatever is true for me in the moment. And I think that for anyone who has any type of emotional content that's waiting to be held and met and accessed, this can be such a beautiful way of gently entering into it. We don't have to talk about anything. We don't have to say anything. We don't have to analyze anything. We can just let the body move energy.
In New York, I had the pleasure of meeting a guy named John Sarno, and he wrote a really good book. I think it's called something like Healing Back Pain. But he spent his entire life, he just passed away a few years ago, but he spent his entire life, he was originally, I believe, a medical doctor, and he saw that so many people would come to him with back pain, and he would try different pharmaceutical medications, and kind of over the early part of his career, he just saw that it didn't really seem to be working. He would take X-rays, and maybe someone would have a herniated disc or scoliosis, and the medical establishment said, "Oh, well, that's the cause of your pain." But he would also see that someone else had the exact same thing and they had no pain. So there wasn't necessarily a causation there. Maybe there was a correlation, but not necessarily a causation. And he really got interested in this idea of what I think is really arising now a lot, also this mind-body connection, this idea of trauma, or these things that are stored in our body. And he used the example of a lot of these things are kind of like a bucket of water, and slowly it's getting filled with each of these experiences. And at some point, when the bucket can't hold any more water, it starts to overflow. And when it starts to overflow, that's when the symptoms begin to manifest, things like back pain, or it could be emotional things. So from your experience in yoga classes, do you think it's something like, with that repeated practice, it's almost like scooping out a cup of water and beginning to slowly empty that pail, and beginning to reset these things or rebalance them, or what's...
Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps. I think if that's what we believe to be true, then yes. I feel that there is probably a call for willingness to meet ourselves authentically, because it can also be turned into an exercise. And so, yes, your body over time will feel great because you are working your muscles and you have joint supplety and suppleness and, greater range of motion, and physically everything is great. But if the lid is still on the pressure cooker, then things are in the background. But if we are willing to get real with ourselves, to maybe be vulnerable, to open up to meeting ourselves in a new way, then it can be a wonderful practice to slowly, like you said, scoop out a little bit of water. And I think it's not just yoga, and Chinese medicine, for example, is also speaking to the same principle. All of our emotions are embodied. In yoga, we say that we have this first most superficial kosha or layer, which is the physical one. Then we have the energetic body, but then right under we have an emotional body. So emotions that are unprocessed, that have been just pushed down because we couldn't deal with them, because it wasn't safe to go there, because we had to cope, because we had to survive, or because we just didn't want to feel them. They over time create what is referred to as energy blockages, and that energy that isn't flowing fully and freely over time may manifest as illness, physical, mental, emotional. And if it's sitting somewhere in our body in one particular place, then perhaps the physical body will have to manifest it somehow. This energy has to find an outlet. And I think it's fascinating that Chinese medicine says not only the same thing, but also points to specific organs and their interrelationship with particular emotions. So you were speaking about lower back, and I think it's fascinating that in traditional Chinese medicine, lower back is kidneys. And kidneys, on the level of emotions that bring them out of balance the most, is interrelated with fear. It's fear that's unprocessed. So a lot of traumatic, perhaps, experiences from our childhood when we were scared and there was just nothing to do with that fear. And we perhaps couldn't even admit to ourselves how scared we are because a whole world would fall apart. But also tendencies to be scared of the future, to be scared in the moment, all of our neurotic fear. And what's really fascinating is that fear seems to directly deplete what is known as jing, which is this most pure distilled form of chi, of energy, of our vitality, of our life force. And it does make our joints more kind of dry and crunchy. It makes our lower back hurt. It really affects our reproductive organs, our urinary tract, etc. And so Chinese medicine, I think, not only points to the same principle, but also takes it further and says, hey, liver, anger, for example, or spleen, worry. And we almost get these keys to unlock how we are affecting our own physical health, how we are affecting our capacity or inability to thrive by the way in which we deal with our emotions. And this very complex experience of being human that contains all of, right, the vast spectrum of emotional experiencing, that for some of us means those emotions I like and I'm going to be with them, and those that I don't really want to go there. So for me, there is an invitation in both of these ways, in the yogic way of living and in the Chinese medicine way of living, to create a very holistic lifestyle where I'm relating to myself and to life with a greater permission for all of these aspects of me to be met just as they are, finding this middle way that feels good and allows me to express what is useful and what helps me feel more connected to me, what helps me grow, and to tend to that which maybe isn't that useful, and to learn how to work with it.
So if someone is saying, this sounds amazing, I want to get in touch with myself, I want to process my emotions,
Yeah.
but they're like, how is a yoga class going to do that? What would you say to them?
I think a yoga class with a teacher who is set on creating a space for people to get in touch with themselves, because that's also, I think, important to reflect that all yoga that's taught in the world today is not taught with the same intentionality. So with a teacher who respects or understands what this practice really is and what it can facilitate, and with a teacher who truly cares about creating a safe space for people to get in touch with themselves, I feel that you get to be with who you are because you're welcome just like that. So a teacher like this will cue moments of quietness and postures. They will use very informed words or reminders to feel what's happening inside of the body. They will keep bringing you back into this place of self-inquiry where you do get to sit with your internal landscapes, where you get to feel the subtleties of your mind body and the way thoughts are popping up, or the way your breath is interacting with your movement, or the way there might be stirrings and percolations underneath your skin. So the practice becomes about what is happening for you within you, and how your breath and how your mind interacts with that, and not so much about what it looks like on the mat. And at the end of a practice like that, I feel we at least catch glimpses of the complexity of who we are, how much there really is that wants to be noticed, wants to be met, wants to be held, and perhaps in a day-to-day life, how little we pay attention to when we just go about our business.
Often in yoga, they talk about this idea of having a repeated practice. Do you think that's something that's really important, is just making that a part of your life, having it as a repeated practice?
I think I'm going to give a controversial answer. I noticed for myself, type A, father wound, very much achiever, also from a culture that's all about high work ethic, that when I got into my yoga practice and noticed that it's helping me to feel better, I made it my everything. And it was every day and it was full on. And then for a few years, I was a very dedicated Ashtanga practitioner, which took it to a whole different level. And it was very much about how far I can push my body and what I can learn. Waking up super early in the morning, doing 2-hour thing. And I noticed over time that it was only really adding fuel to the fire underneath the parts of me that were already out of balance, overly pushing, too much masculine energy, very little permission to drop into just being. Perhaps not so much understanding of patience even towards myself. So for me, that way of relating to practice eventually became a whip that I was taking to myself to feel a little bit better about who I am. And it was only really when I had, ironically, in the practice, an injury that I got in my foot and was forced to stop practicing for good 4 months, that I turned to yin to still work with my joints, and dropped so deeply in a completely different way that I realized that I was completely missing the point. And this was after many years of very dedicated practicing. And so ever since then, which has really been the last 5 years or 6 years, I have been rediscovering what yoga means to me almost on my own terms, what feels good. And some days that means that I'm rolling out my mat and I'm showing up and I'm practicing breathing, moving, yes. And when I am in periods of my life where there's perhaps a lot going on externally, I do try to connect regularly because it helps me stay present, helps me stay anchored. But also on a day when I just really don't want to do it and I just want to read or go for a walk or maybe go for a run, I give myself permission to do that because I want my practice to be something I am excited to show up for, because I want to connect with myself in that space rather than some sort of discipline or obligation or this thing that just has to happen. For me, with my complexion and my kind of makeup, this feels really good. For some people, perhaps it works better when it's an everyday thing. I think if we have a tendency to procrastinate or maybe yoga, okay, Netflix, then it could be helpful for the first at least year to practice 6 times a week and see how that affects you and then find your balance.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any recommendations or advice to people? Because I think that's something I would imagine a lot of people struggle with is finding that balance, because it's, on the one hand, it takes discipline, it takes determination to do something, and it can be very easy to say, oh well, today I feel like doing something else. So how does one find that happy medium of obviously listening to that desire within that's maybe legitimately saying like, I need a break,
Hmm.
versus the voice that's saying, I need a break, but it really just wants to watch Netflix.
Yeah. I feel that a lot depends on our intentionality behind practicing. If we are practicing because this really resonates so deeply and we feel that this is a space in which we get in touch with ourselves in a new way, or this is really useful, this is a practice that seems to help me understand myself better, then I would say practice at least 4 times a week. Most teachers would say don't practice more than 6, just so that at least one day a week you have rest and your muscles can have a sense of recuperating. And there is also this day of not building up too much internal fire. But if you are working, you're living in a big city, and this isn't just accessible, why are you practicing? If you are practicing because it feels good for your body, maybe once a week is enough. If you're practicing because you really are finding that you are going deep with yourself here, I think 4 times a week is a great amount of time if it's doable. And I really believe that even 10 minutes are much more useful than 2 hours once a week. So 10 minutes, 6 times a week, just to cultivate maybe this willingness to keep showing up, especially at the beginning. I think that's really important. And these days, I sometimes practice for an hour, sometimes I roll around for 2, sometimes I just go and sit in meditation. I really work with what feels intuitively useful for me in the moment. And I'm able to tap into that because of years of cultivating different practices and having an understanding of what is useful to me moment by moment. Sometimes at first, it's like with a puppy, we have to repeat, right? 20 times. Okay, this is not where you pee. This is not where you pee. And show the puppy the right way before it gets it. And especially if this is a new practice, it may be that we need to hold ourselves accountable. I am going to go to this teacher, to this class 4 times a week. This also means that the teacher gets to know you, especially if you're going to the same school, to the same person. They have an understanding of how your practice is growing. You can ask questions, you can form a friendship or at least a rapport where you're seen and you're held by the Sangha, by the community. And I feel that's also the true gift, gem of what yoga can be, that we end up meeting people with whom we're pulled even deeper into the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So also in terms of that, I mean, this question is going to be a bit tough to answer because it also depends on people as well. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is that balance between really dedicating yourself to one practice
Mm-hmm.
versus, also, as you said, kind of listening to the body that maybe it needs different things. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for example, would it be beneficial to practice a few different types of yoga to find that balance, or maybe even doing other practices? Or do you think maybe in the beginning it's really good to dedicate yourself to one practice so you really understand it, and then begin to branch out into other things? Or
Mm-hmm.
does it really just, that's something every person has to find on their own?
Perhaps every person has to find their way, but I would recommend starting, especially let's say you're new to yoga, I would say go to 3 different styles, see which class resonated the most, and stay with that teacher or that class, that method for a while. It's impossible to really gauge how this impacts us and how it influences our way of being just from one practice. It is really more felt at least after a month or after a few months when we get a greater understanding of what the practice really entails. Um, and I feel that because of our unique makeup and the way we function, our personalities, we each resonate with different methods, with different teachers, with different ways of moving and breathing and being. And some people really want to be challenged physically. That's where they find themselves. They feel that connectedness. Other people just want to be held in a space where they are breathing and told that they can do whatever they want to do. And so I would go with what feels good. And eventually, I feel, especially once we do have more experience, we're more intuitively guided to what feels right and what resonates. And that's where it's great to experiment. Someday I wake up and I really feel like moving. And often that's when I go for a run. Or when I feel like connecting with myself more deeply, I do yin yoga. But if it's a place where you're just entering into the practice and you haven't got that much experience, try it out and then stick to one thing. Because I feel it's only through getting to know one thing really well, we understand what it does for us. And with this amount of variety, especially if someone is blessed to live in a big city with, 500 yoga schools, it almost is tempting to kind of do a pick and mix and jump around. And that is even more tempting if yoga studios have intro offers and you get to do 1 month for $10 or, whatever that is. And over the year, you end up practicing in 12 different studios. But I feel that we cannot ever go as deep with that when we're just, dabbling. So it's through the commitment and through the active showing up over and over again in the same space, getting also vulnerable by being seen, by getting to know other people, by interacting with your teachers, that the true gifts of this practice become clear. And maybe those gifts that resonate with me wouldn't resonate with you. But that's where we each have to find out what we're really looking for.
Mm-hmm. Would you say from your experience there's maybe good qualities to look for in a teacher in a studio that would be more conducive to really gaining something from yoga?
That too perhaps is personal. The teacher that I loved the most in London was famous for her fierceness and for her no bullshit tough love. And she would ban people from coming late to the room. She would say very direct things in the middle of the class. You really had to be willing to sit in shame or at least be reflected your shame back to practice with her, because she just wasn't worried about being direct. And I love that about her, because I knew that she's not saying any of that to hurt or to embarrass, but because she just wants everyone to see themselves clearly, or she wanted to reflect us back to us. And some of my most transformative moments came when I was practicing and she would call me out in the middle of 50 people and say, where are you rushing off to? We're still in a previous shape, by name, everyone knows you, everyone's looking, and you have to sit with that. But that worked for me. And at the time of my life, I really just loved what she brought into my practice. And at the same time, I acknowledged that other people could potentially feel totally intimidated by that way of teaching. So I would say go with who resonates with you. There are teachers that are very much straight to the point, going deep, bringing up uncomfortable questions. And there are also teachers who are much softer, much more nourishing, much more loving, or there are teachers who are fun. With the growth of yoga into international industry and the accessibility of yoga teacher trainings, there are probably millions of people who share this practice, which perhaps makes it easier for us to find someone that we resonate with. And when we really do, that's the person that can help us go deep.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, because now there's like Yoga Alliance and official yoga
Mm-hmm.
teacher trainings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's important, or there is an importance to it, and it can also have its downsides? What are your thoughts on that?
So I have been teaching for many years and I have never registered with Yoga Alliance. This has never stood in my way of teaching at schools, retreat centers. I eventually taught also for a while at yoga teacher trainings, hosting my own offerings. No one has ever said to me, where's your certificate? And I have done many different trainings also over the time. So for me personally, it feels very monetized, and it feels like someone has decided that they're going to now charge all the yoga teachers for sharing what really is a spiritual practice. And people like Sharon Gannon and David Life, the founders of Jivamukti Yoga, or people like Patabi Joyce, the founder of Ashtanga Yoga, they haven't done teacher trainings that are Yoga Alliance, registered somewhere. They have studied and they share the practice. I understand that also in big cities, it's often required that if you want to teach in a studio that's in a public space, you have to show it. And yeah, it doesn't feel good to see that this is where we are held accountable, because I feel, having been in a teacher training industry, that it's really easy to actually just pay go do your teacher training, you get your piece of paper. It's actually not very difficult to go through this process if you can afford it financially. And there you go. You're a yoga teacher. You register yourself. On paper, everything looks great, but you, for example, are terrible at teaching and you don't know how to keep people safe. And someone goes to your class and has a knee injury afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is it really transferable that if someone is Yoga Alliance registered, they're definitely a great teacher? Uh,
Yeah, well, that's interesting because that kind of transitions into plant medicine because it's a very
yeah.
similar thing. Um, and obviously there are charlatans out there. There's people who don't know what they're doing,
Mhm.
and there is no certificate to say, hey, this person really does. And actually, probably in that world, if anyone does have a certificate, probably there's something a little strange about that.
Yes.
um,
And
so go ahead. Yeah.
I think a reflection from that is the correlation that I see that you could fly to India and be so desperate to find a true Indian teacher of yoga. And you will find this teacher who's a total fraud and he actually isn't a yogi. His father isn't a yogi. He's just benefiting of the fact that Westerners are coming to have a real experience. And he's either teaching you something or takes your money. And, those stories exist and that can be true. And you might have the most transformative experience with a white Western teacher who has even never been to India. And equally, you come to the jungle and you want to have this real shaman. So it has to be someone indigenous. And then you go to that real indigenous shaman, but maybe again, you have a terrible experience because this shaman isn't really a shaman. They just have some medicine and they know that this is what you want. And then you might have the most incredible medicine experience with a white person completely somewhere else than the jungle, and vice versa. I think the lines are very blurred. And because these sacred ancient practices have been brought to the West and have been practiced by the Western people and have been shared also and taught, um, we can expect both. We can expect really terrible yoga teachers from the West who have no clue about what really this practice is. And we can also experience fake teachers or teacher trainings in India just because it's being monetized, and perhaps plant medicine similarly. Wonderful experiences in the Amazon, like the center where we have met. I think it's an incredible place and it's been a privilege and honor to work there. And I have also had many, 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 heard many stories from the Amazon of just not great experiences with people who perhaps aren't good on their own.
Yeah.
Westerners who are holding ceremonies at 10th floor apartments because once they drank ayahuasca and they just brought it back. And having personally sat with Western people who have held the most incredible space. So what is true and what is traditional and what is real?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did you become interested in plant medicine? Was that just a natural transition from yoga, or it was something completely different?
I actually was not interested in plant medicine for a very long time, despite hearing about it, because I got clean in a 12-step recovery, which was very clear about every substance is a drug and you just have to be teetotal, and once you're clean, you have to stay clean or you're going to relapse. And because that saved my life at some point in time, I lived by that and that felt true. And then when I started to hear about ayahuasca, I felt this internal conflict of being so deeply fascinated and thinking like, oh my God, what do you mean this is what happens there? And also holding myself accountable, like, no, 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 this is probably a drug. Don't ever go there.
Isn't that really
And
interesting though? Because from my understanding, I have a lot of friends who have been in the 12-step program, and some have
mm-hmm,
really, really benefited from it. Some maybe not so
mm-hmm,
much. But from
mm-hmm.
my understanding, the founder of that actually kind of received his revelation under LSD.
Or
That's how the whole
mushrooms,
thing
something
was.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how the whole
yeah,
thing came to be.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it misses a point. I think a lot could be said about people who are, yes, 20 years clean, 30 years clean, but compulsively cheat on their partners or are addicted to shopping. And because it's so rigid, I found it left so much unacknowledged, and there was no permission to really express. It just had to be this way. And yeah, I stepped away from that path as soon as I really started to work with plant medicine. I made a choice, and I haven't regretted it. I know that I will never go and buy cocaine because I understand why I used it many years ago, and there's just no point. I
Mm.
don't feel that working with plant medicine has made me more prone to score. Yeah, I actually I had an experience where I woke up from a dream in which essentially I revisited a memory from childhood that was completely repressed, and re-remembered happening from my childhood from, at the time, that was like 20 years of just being completely disconnected from it. And it was middle of the night. I was in turmoil. I was crying and so shocked because everything made sense. I completely forgot about this happening, and now remembering, I understand why so many other things along the way causally also took place. And the only thing in that dark night that I could think of was, I must drink ayahuasca. That's all I knew. It just came so clearly because I felt that as if there is more that I just cannot access. Perhaps this is the way to go deeper. And so I remember taking my phone and I actually looked up the website of Temple of the Way of Light. And I was scrolling through the photos. I took a screenshot of two healers who I ended up later on having a very dear relationship with. So the breadcrumbs of the universe along the way. And because I was soon going to India again, I just knew, okay, it's not going to work right now, but maybe I can go there the following year. That was my intention. And within 5 days, I was actually going to work for a while in Berlin at a retreat center where I would work during the monsoon months while being in Europe. And as soon as I arrived, I was talking to the owner and just having a really deep childhood trauma conversation, and told him about this happening from the other night. And he said, well, don't worry. We have some ayahuasca shamans coming, so you can have your retreat here and do your work. Um, so it was very beautiful how that clarity of this is what I need to do, and aligning with what really was my truth in the moment, and the call that has been coming subtly, and fully giving into the trust that this is the right thing, regardless of the indoctrination of previous ways of healing or moving forwards, I think has opened the doors. And this just appeared, and couple of years later, I ended up working at the very center to which I originally wanted to go. So,
So what has been your experience with plant medicine? I mean,
mhm.
obviously something initially drew you to that, this experience you had. What has been your experience working with it? What would you say are the benefits of it? What do you think it's actually doing? Why is it beneficial?
Having touched so many different ways of working with or meeting my emotions, being with my internal processes, understanding myself, yoga, therapy, meditation. I really have tried so many different things. It always has felt like I was never really going as deep as I needed to fully grasp or get to conclusions or the depth of insights that I needed to fully complete something or move forward, or release, or find a greater sense of ease or surrender, especially with key themes of my life. And it truly felt that it was in plant medicine that I was finally able to meet myself in a completely different depth, at a completely different depth. And themes that have been dragging on throughout my whole life were reflected back to me and brought to me for understanding, forgiveness, compassion, integration in a very new way. And this particular way resonated really deeply and allowed me to really complete a lot of internal processes that, yeah, like I said, have been dragging on, or have always felt like, yeah, I've done this work, but I'm still not fully quite like this. There's more, there must be more, something's still not quite fully complete. But for me also, from the background of yoga and the background of Eastern philosophies, plant medicine has been almost like this confirmation through my own embodied experience that everything that I have come to understand intellectually to be true. Like yoga is the merging of the universal self with the individual self, and it's the remembering of the totality. It all sounds really beautiful, and you can study as many scriptures as possible and catch the glimpses of that in space of meditation. Plant medicine really showed me what that means, not only as a, you know, higher state of consciousness, incredible experience of God, but as an embodied way of showing up for life, remembering the God within, the universe within, moment by moment in my interactions with others, by also showing me how I block that, how I tell myself stories that stop me from feeling that, from remembering that. Um, and I think for years, most of my ceremonies, I was sitting there just like, I remember, of course, I remember, over and over and over again. It just really felt like I needed to have this someone else, which I feel to be really me, but maybe externalized, these plants, these magical spirits, this higher consciousness, take my hand and just gently remind me over and over again, do you remember what we spoke about last time? Let's look at this again, until it eventually dropped. And I realized that, okay, this is where I meet myself, and this is where I remind myself. And it actually now feels, and has felt for a while, that it no longer needs to be an active part of my life. Not because I'm done with it, or not because I am enlightened or woke, or, you know, just kind of the work is over. I feel that what I have come to understand is that life is a ceremony, and I really believe this to be true, and that every interaction of the day, every challenge of the day, every moment of beauty brings a different quality of medicine, and there is medicine in everything. And if I'm willing to see medicine in everything, then even the most feisty argument with my husband, or most annoying situation somewhere in a shop, will be reflecting back to me the ways in which I contract, the ways in which I hold back, the ways in which I don't want to show up for life as it is, because I have a greater idea of how it should be. And so I actually feel equipped for life, thanks to these tools that also plant medicine has gifted me with, and this different, deeper, perhaps greater understanding of me that I came in touch with in the space of ceremonies. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. If someone isn't familiar at all, I mean, even this terminology we're using, plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe that to someone?
I think every medicine, mm, I think every plant can be medicine in that sense. So I don't think plant medicine is just psychoactive plants. I feel that plant medicine is reconnecting with the wisdom of nature, coming down from the pedestal of we are humanity and nature is just around to look pretty and we decide what happens to it, into perhaps an acknowledgement or re-remembering that actually these beings have been here far longer than we have, and carry greater wisdom than we do, and are just patiently holding space for our neurosis. And so I find plant medicine in, yes, psychoactive plants, or entheogens like, let's say, ayahuasca or San Pedro or psilocybin, but I also found a lot of healing in, for example, working with a tree that's really traditional to Central and Eastern Europe, that in Polish we call sosna, and drinking the brew made of the bark of this tree and having a whole process with just that tree, which it wasn't psychoactive, and yet it was so deep. So for me, plant medicine is willing to be taught and to be brought into a possibility of a healing by this presence, this being, this spirit, this energy of nature, in a form, in a shape of a plant or of a tree or of a shrub or flower. And I think that when we're willing to listen, everything is medicine and everything is a teacher. And it's the most humble experience to sit with these tiny little things that it would be so easy to pull out of these the soil and destroy, who bring us into a space of vulnerability and authenticity, and kind of just wait around like, okay, humans, come on, do your homework. Here it is. It really, for me, readjusted everything I believe to be true about life, and how actually all of our priorities as humanity have been upside down. So I think this is a great potential, where regardless whether people want to work with plant medicine in a context of psychoactive plants, or whether they just may want to engage with their local herbs or trees, there is healing in the presence of nature, and there is healing in the energy of nature, which for me feels very nourishing and permitting and patient. And just the simple act of going to a park, to a forest, and hugging a tree and taking a moment to be in this space can be medicine. So it doesn't necessarily perhaps have to mean ingesting anything and being in a ceremonial space with a shaman who does something. It can be laying on the earth and just allowing the earth to hold you, and remembering that we actually are always supported, and there is so much abundance and so much life, and that we are nature too.
From your experience working at a place like the temple, what would you say are the really common themes, or maybe there aren't, but do you see maybe themes or archetypes of why people are coming down? And then also, how do you think plant medicine is helping people to resolve those issues?
It seems that there are two groups, that there are people who are cold or drawn from a more, let's call it, spiritual point of, I want to try this, I've been hearing about it, or I'm dreaming about it, or this is coming to me, or I've heard of it and it sounds great, and I'm ready to go deeper, or to try something new, or to question my whole belief system. And there also seem to be people who are brought to plant medicine maybe as a last resort, or as a way of finding answers or help with trauma, with unresolved physical problems that maybe the more allopathic Western way of dealing with health doesn't have answers for. So I've seen both groups, and I've seen incredible ways in which the medicine interacts with both of those groups. And in my own retreats as well, I would have people sign up because they are curious, and they know that this is something that has been in their periphery and vicinity, and they just were waiting for the moment that felt right. Like, this is the time when I'm ready to interact and meet myself in a new way. And there are also people who have suffered from depression, who have suffered from addiction, who have felt failed by Western ways of dealing with physical or mental or emotional illness, and are willing to see their problems from a new perspective. I think we touched a little bit about that at the beginning when you were talking about lower back, that the Western way is, okay, your lower back hurts, here is a medication. And the beauty of plant medicine and the difficulty of that is that plant medicine says, hey, let's look at why your lower back hurts. Would you like to remember what happened? Or would you like to feel what you're storing there? And so we have to be willing to show up, both, whether we come for personal evolution, transformation, ascension, whatever we call that, or whether we're just fed up with not feeling good about life, or our lower back hurting continuously for the last 10 years. We have to be willing to look at why and what's really there. Mm-hmm.
So would you say that's what the plants are doing, is essentially they're taking us into a process of self-inquiry, of reflection, of remembering?
I feel that plants hold up a mirror to what I like to call the inner landscapes, or the inner terrains. And I feel that oftentimes for me, they have opened the door and they said, okay, let's look at what's on the other side of this door. Let's look at what's behind there. Your choice what you do with it. Your choice where you go. I have never felt pushed or forced or brought into anything by force. It always felt more like a ground within which I am encouraged or invited, maybe even more invited than encouraged, to come to my own conclusions, to come to my own realizations, to make my own choices. And that's why for me, the analogy of a mirror really resonates. It feels like I am shown what it is that I am really made of, my beliefs, my emotions, the memories that maybe I just shoved somewhat down there because I just didn't want to deal with it or couldn't at the time, the ways in which I sabotage myself by repeating some programs, stories that no longer serve me, the ways in which I apply fear in my ways of relating to life. It really is an incredible playground of meeting myself and remembering all of life, the universe from within myself. And so the moments of magic, the incredible visionary ceremonies for me don't feel like there is this universe somewhere out there and I'm just catching glimpses into it. It's really the mirror that says, hey, remember, this is who you are. This individual being actually is totality, having an experience of individual being that in this incarnation looks like this. And so I don't remember your question.
Basically, what you're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
that if these plants are, in a way, making us look at things from a different way or putting things into perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, it's so personal what's happening
Yeah.
each individual, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, people are benefiting so much, so something is
Yes.
happening.
Yes. And I've seen so many people go through the most powerful healings where oftentimes, especially, and I think I've seen this in the jungle a lot, something physical, something very felt, something that's been so difficult to live with becomes completely resolved once and for all, even if doctors said there's nothing we can do for you, because it turns out that there is a trauma from many years ago that was completely forgotten or repressed in a way that the body was just storing and holding, or seemingly unrelated events are suddenly made sense of, and there is this greater freedom and a relief. And I think that the mystery within which these plants work is the most beautiful thing about it, that we won't be able to figure out how, and yet you and I can sit in a ceremony together and we will each drink from the same cup, the same medicine, and you will have a completely different experience and I will have a completely different experience, and we will both be taken exactly to the place that is useful to where we're at today, and in a space which addresses what we need to address to thrive in this moment of the day. And that is so unique and that is so individual. And yeah, just especially working with medicine like San Pedro, or the ceremonies are daytime happenings, and the lineage that I have been studying with Bernard, who was your guest also in one of these episodes, to see a daytime ceremony with 10 people. One is dancing, one is rolling around, someone is crying, someone is looking confused. Everyone gets exactly what they need. And it becomes so clear that this greater intelligence really knows what's better for us, maybe. If we can just move out the way and allow, then we are automatically brought into a place where we get to see what we need to see in a moment and get to hold within ourselves what's yearning to be held. And yes, I ultimately really feel that it's a mirror. It's a one great mirror in which my beauty, my magic, my joy, my creativity, my total neurosis and confusion, and my anger and my fear are all right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can go and do what I want with it or make a story about it.
You use this word intelligence, and it's something that many people use once they start working with these plants. They'll talk in this terminology of intelligence. It could be plant intelligence. Some people, they may use the word, the spirit of the plant is communicating with them. Uh, I think maybe some people who study it in maybe a more scientific way would say, oh, well, it's a certain alkaloid affecting some, neuron in your brain that's turned on. Some people would say they're having a communication with God. I mean, I think even, I mean, that's another really common term is something like revelation. I mean, even we were talking about the AA guy. I mean, essentially he had revelation. He took a substance and it something was revealed to him to go and to work this way. And I mean, we see that in so many practices. I mean, Moses, he received revelation. There's a famous rabbinical scholar who says, even that story is very metaphorical because he was surrounded by burning acacia bushes, which have DMT. And I mean, often I even think about these things like you were mentioning traditional Chinese medicine and like the meridians and the mapping of that. I mean, how does someone come upon that? From my experience working with plants is seemingly a very logical way of how someone could be opened to that kind of intelligence. Um, so I know this is again a hard question, but from your experience, what do you think that intelligence is?
The way in which I give meaning to life is in finding magic and connection and spirit and everything. That's what works for me. And I deeply believe that yes, it's spirit, is God, it's the totality, whatever language I wouldn't use, but I feel it's the source of all life that's interacting with me or communicating with me from within this shape or form of a plant that's relatable in this moment, because perhaps it's beyond my understanding to truly comprehend what really is happening. So it feels a little bit more digestible to think, okay, here I am drinking something. This is made of different plants. Those different plants in this form are coming in contact with me, or their spirits. But if it's just one big consciousness communicating with itself, having an experience of Marta and having an experience of a plant and just having this interaction, then to a human mind, for me at least, that feels a bit too abstract to work with. But I do feel, for me, there is God or there is totality. That's for me the remembering in yoga, that universal consciousness, that I am remembering myself to be, and to be having an experience of me as that. And the plants for me are a reminder of source, life at large, God. I actually don't have language for it, and that's why I love it so much, because I cannot actually explain it. And I feel that to me, it can mean something completely different than it does to you. And that's the beauty of it, that it doesn't actually have to be anything. And like I said, for me, life is given greater meaning through magic. I find synchronicities in everything. Everything has a reason, and that feels really good. That's how I love to interact with life. And so it feels really good for me to know that I am supported by a force, whether I call it of that also wants me to remember how to come into a greater alignment with who I truly am, that is helping me find my way back to me when I entangle myself in all sorts of things, content, stories, clutter. It feels like communion with something unnameable. It sometimes feels very empty. Other times it feels very full. And both of these experiences for me felt perfectly interwoven and synergetic. Emptiness and fullness just continuously merging and interacting. Um, I feel this is something also very ancient in a way that perhaps that's all there is. And I'm catching glimpses into something that's beyond what my mind can ever figure out in this life. Um, Sometimes I also have had experiences where I felt like there's actually so much more than just the human experience. And surely there must be not only other dimensions, but all these star beings and other planets and these much more, let's say, ascendant beings waiting for us to finally arrive at that evolved level of consciousness to be able to maybe remember, relearn, interact. So who knows what really is going on?
Much much like with yoga, maybe 20 years ago, there's been this real proliferation of it, and I would imagine a lot of that has to do with obviously the benefit that people are receiving from it. There seems to be a real need, and that's filling a hole. And it seems, especially in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, that's also beginning to happen with this plant work. Is it's really beginning to spread. I mean, almost at an exponential rate. And I would imagine a lot of that is a similar thing. There's a real need for that in people. And you mentioned this idea of magic, and it seems to me one of the things that really people benefit from is just that, which is something that I think so many of us, we've become really disconnected from. Almost any child kind of believes in magic. I mean, even if it's not something that's inherently taught to them, but there's this sense of wonder, sense of awe. Everything is new, everything is fresh. And something from my own experience of working with plant medicine, especially working with other people, is it really, much like you were describing, it really instills in them, or it makes them remember, in your terminology, that there is magic. There's a sense of awe. There's a sense of that vastness or emptiness or fullness, these things that we really don't necessarily experience in our day-to-day lives. Do you think that's maybe something that's really fundamental to plant work, that's so important, is just reinstilling in people that we don't actually understand everything, that there are things that are still magical in a way, things that the mind isn't able to grasp?
Yeah, I think I need to take a moment. Sorry to cough. It's not a COVID cough.
Well, we're socially distancing by a few thousand
We're
miles.
socially It's perfect. Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I feel that this wonder and this amazement at the smallest things gets so quickly tempered down or discouraged once we go into perhaps even formal education. You just have to submit to a certain way of being, of understanding, of relating. And even maybe perhaps certain parenting styles when the children are still a little bit too connected in the parents' understanding to, oh, mom, I'm talking to this fairy in my room. There are no fairies. I think that slowly conditions us to mistrust our own connectedness to life and our own ability to be so fascinated with everything, with the petals of flowers and the shapes of clouds. And plant medicines definitely do take us in that space. And sometimes we re-engage with it from the perspective of, oh my God, these rainbows and unicorns and these amazing visions that have nothing to do with our most immediate reality, the shapes and colors and patterns. And yet when we do re-engage with life as it is, here and now, there is a certain sense of seeing it more clearly, the colors being a little bit more vivid, being reminded of how incredibly stunning everything is. And at the same time, I feel that this is also reflected in our own internal processes. So often these tools bring us back into a place of wonder of who we truly are. And we get to maybe merge with God or have an experience of oneness or feel held by the earth or the mother or whatever we wouldn't feel is holding us and loving us, and remember, like, wow, okay, I am this incredible living being that is so loved and so magical and so creative, and an experience of immense downloads of writing or painting or singing in the space of working with plant medicines can be so telling of our infinite potential to create. But sometimes we are so disconnected from that creativity that we have to have that someone something remind us, well, look, you can birth all these songs and pieces of art and write all these books. Here it is. Do you remember that this is coming from within you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, beautiful. So I remember one time walking into the Temple of the Way of Light, and I forget her name, but she's the lady who I think does a lot of PR and social media for the temple, and she was
Mhm.
actually saying that your classes or your workshops were, I think the ones that booked out the fastest. So it seems like a lot of people really resonated with this idea of not only working with plant medicine, but combining that with yoga.
Mhm.
How do you think that those two things correlate? What is the symbiotic relationship that's really making those two things work together?
Mhm. Yeah, this is a great question. And I could probably record a separate podcast with you about just that. So, in a very short answer, both are energy medicines, both are platforms to move energy, to uncover, understand, release energy patterns or energy blockages, however we wouldn't name them, that aren't useful or feel dense or feel unhelpful or have been causing us problems, illness, etc. However, I feel the speciality and the kind of yumminess of why these two together is that through yoga, we really get to integrate what is coming up for us in the space of ceremonies. So your body becomes this ground, this place from which you do go deeper within yourself. But it is all grounded, it is all embodied. And that feeling of coming from an overnight ayahuasca ceremony onto a yoga mat and being with whatever has arose in the space of a ceremony without yet naming it, without yet talking about it with other people, just breathing into it, moving with it, oftentimes takes us even deeper into the realizations that we have had, into the insights that we have had, and we get to re-explore them in a completely different way, away from these higher states of consciousness and in an embodied, grounded, present place of here I am, this is this body, this is this moment. How can I process what has come up for me and feel it and make it mine so that it becomes a seed from which I start to engage with life and with myself in a new way. Coming into a ceremony of any plant medicine prepared through meditation and through a movement practice is also incredibly helpful. We are so much more here in this physical body, so much less likely perhaps to check out or to get really frustrated when we have intense physical sensation or something, right arm starts to fly around in the air. Can happen. If you have an understanding of your body or a sense of connectedness to it, then you may feel, okay, my right arm is flapping in the air. Can I allow that? And can I inquire within, why is it doing it? I feel that we create a bigger resource of patience and receptivity towards how the body is working with the medicine and how the medicine is working with us through the platform of our body, which for me at least often is somatics, sensations, pulsations, pains, organs firing up, just really very bodily. And I am much more equipped to receive that and to even feel it and notice it if I am in touch with my body. And the best way for me to get in touch with my body is on a yoga mat.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good way of putting it. I hadn't thought of it that way before. About after ceremony getting grounded by
Yeah.
getting on your mat. It's
Yeah.
interesting because I was talking to Sean Chitty, and one of the things we were talking about is often, and I think to some degree you could see it in yoga or a lot of spiritual practices, but especially in this work, there's often, I don't know what the right word is, but maybe this kind of putting on a pedestal these qualities of being really out there or airy or sensitive. And I think you would probably agree from my experience working with really good doctors, really good curanderos, is that's not the quality they embody at all. It's very much a sense of groundedness, a sense of strength, a sense of clarity, an openness, but they're very rooted in not only the work they're doing, but this reality. Um, so yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it, that actually yoga can help to ground you after a ceremony, because many ceremonies can very much open you to that space, which is very ethereal or kind of not of this world. And that's something that even in this work we do, that's a really big topic now, is this sense of integration, of taking those things and integrating them back into your life, which often can be these really magnificent, profound, otherworldly experiences. But I think with this idea of integration, what's being shown that's really important is, how do I take that and integrate that into my life? How do I ground it? How do I make it real? How do I bridge it into this reality? So do you think a practice of yoga is a really good way to not only during the workshop itself, but after, to really help to ground and integrate those experiences?
Any practice. I feel any way in which we show up for ourselves that creates space just to be with self is an amazing way to integrate, whether that's yoga, whether that's painting, whether that's hugging trees, whether that's singing, journaling, drumming, any way that feels like the most authentic space to be honest and authentic and vulnerable and be with me. That for me feels like the practice I want to cultivate. Movement, I think, is always useful because it does help us be in touch with how our body is feeling and notice these moments of holding, moments of tension. Breath practices are always useful, and with interaction with plant medicine, it is useful to know how to breathe. And outside of that space, it is useful to know that your breath can help you meet life as it arises, and your experience as well, no less vivid, may take a lesser grip on you if you know how to breathe and if you know how to calm down your nervous system so that you're not in fight or flight, but actually, okay, parasympathetic, I can relax and I can take conscious action. All of this can be cultivated really successful on a daily basis. But when people come to work with me or come to my retreats, I always say, find something that feels really true to you so that you feel joy engaging with it, so that you are looking forward to that time with yourself. And I think for me as a person, very privileged to live a life as I want it to be, with lots of personal time and free time. It can be any time of the day, and it can take any shape. And I recognize that perhaps that's not very common, and a lot of people do go to work on Monday and finish on Friday, and their only time off is weekend. So could you have a commitment? Every Sunday for 1 hour, you will do something just for you, and the phone and laptop are not included. So not that you're painting and recording it on Instagram while you paint, or, meditating and filming yourself meditating so that you can put it up on your profile. But how can you just be with you? Because I feel that's really what's missing for us. And that's what yoga and plants and so many other wonderful practices are bringing us back into. Can we sit with ourselves just as we are? Can I sit with how irritated I may be? Can I sit with how helpless I may feel, confused? Or can I sit with my excitement and just feel it without needing to tell my few thousand followers that I'm feeling excited? Can it just be for me to be with me? Um, and whatever that looks like. Sometimes I practice, sometimes I write. I think journaling, or any form of self-inquiry that isn't just a mental processing, can be really helpful, so that we have this inner dialogue and we have a space of reflectiveness, keeping ourselves accountable. That really works for me. And I don't journal every day, but I journal often. Sometimes I just feel like painting, or sometimes I feel like taking an hour to cook something that I'm really going to enjoy eating, or anything. And I think that's the beauty, that the practice can be anything that you want it to be. Like God's spirituality can be anything that you want it to be. So life has given us full freedom to find our way to connect and to thrive and to feel the sense of wholeness and belonging and joy that perhaps are our true nature. And have always been there. We don't have to heal to be whole or work on our issues to feel joy.
Mhm.
Mm.
Is there, maybe it's not possible, but is there like a really short, simple breathing exercise that you would recommend to people that could benefit them?
Mm-hmm. What really helps me, especially in moments of overwhelm or feeling grounded, is to use what we call the belly breath. So rather than breathing just, I'll maybe lower my screen a little bit, rather than breathing just from here, to breathe from the belly. So to use the diaphragm and the part of the belly that's just below the navel, and inhaling, the belly expands, and exhaling, the navel goes in. So this is actually almost counterintuitive to how we draw air from the higher parts of our lungs. But the diaphragmic breath is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. So it is connected to our sense of safety, and it regulates our adrenal responses to stress, to stimulants, to overwhelm. For me, whenever I feel like, okay, I'm just thinking too much, I'm not in my body, I'm overwhelmed, hands on my belly, I close my eyes, inhale, belly goes out, exhale, belly goes in. And even just a minute, because it does require attention to stay with the mechanics, completely calms down my whole responsiveness to whatever is going on. And also, even if nothing is going on, it creates a really felt sense of ease. So sometimes when I want to meditate, but I feel that I would like to use a technique to be in that space of presence, I use this breath. That fullness of the belly also is a reminder of the fullness of life, and that sense of coming back to the center, drawing back to the core. It's like, okay, there's this fullness and expansiveness, but I come back to me. I am there and I am here. Mm.
Mm-hmm. So you think,
Expansion, contraction.
uh, so
Mm-hmm.
even 1 minute would be sufficient?
Yeah. And that's also for me the beauty of the practice, that especially for someone who has never done anything and doesn't really know quite how to start, I would say start small. Commit to doing something for 5 minutes every day. So 5 minutes without the phone, just sitting and breathing. Or 5 minutes if you have a garden, if you have a park, laying on the grass looking at the sky. Anything that helps to start carving out more and more space to be with self, to be with the present moment just as it is. Even if your leg is so itchy or you're irritated or thinking about what to cook for dinner, can you for 5 minutes give yourself this gift of being really here and now? And over time, that becomes a space in which we do start to cultivate self-inquiry and do organically become more and more in tune with what is present for us. So the 5 minutes may turn into 10 minutes, and I may notice that I'm actually incredibly sad today. And rather than trying to understand why or needing it to be different, can I maybe lay on the grass and feel my sadness and notice that all it really wants is to be just noticed and held. And after a few moments of breathing into that sadness, it might no longer be there. And I didn't need to do anything about it. Mm-hmm.
Mm. You mentioned earlier you've been occupying some of your time with a mentorship program. Is that
Yes.
something you can talk about?
Yeah, I'd love to. Um, it is a natural development of my years of teaching and holding retreats. And like I mentioned at the beginning, doing different trainings and going down, let's call it a rabbit hole of my own internal processes and growth. And I felt that there are just so many amazing techniques that really work differently with different people. And in the format of my retreats, typically I would have groups of, let's say, between 10 and 15 people. I would either hold the whole space myself or I would co-create with another teacher. And oftentimes I felt that there was a particular rapport between me and someone on the retreat. And I knew that I could help to hold space for this guest to go even more deeply within whatever process they were going through, but it wasn't really appropriate during a retreat format. It's not really fair to single someone out and give them more attention than other people. And I have had people come to me and say, would you consider working with me one-on-one? And somewhere between those 2 points, a place within me created or birthed itself where I felt like this is the time to offer the space for people who are ready to work one-on-one with me to go into it. And it's been over a year that I have been mentoring. I call it spiritual mentorship. It's not a therapy. I'm not a therapist. I'm not Shanchudi. I offer a safe space for people to be witnessed. And what has been really beautiful is that this became really a container for me to share my experiences, yes, my gifts, also the tools and practices that have worked for me, but more so a space where a human being is witnessing another human being. And I find that that's really often what we need to go into our own inner processes and heal and do our work, to simply be witnessed fully with total acceptance and welcoming and loving care by another person in our pain, in our turmoil, in our confusion, to have someone listen to us, name the things that we have been done to us, that we are struggling with, and figure things out by ourselves while someone else is bearing witness to this unfolding. I think the magical part of it for me is that in the process of having worked with plant medicine extensively, having also done many diets, I feel very guided by the plants, the trees, God, spirit, whatever we name it. And so oftentimes, most of the time, I don't really know what's going to come up in a session. I have my toolbox of practices, a lot of somatic experiencing. We work a lot with visualization, meditation, also self-inquiry, dialogue, but I just don't know what will come up. And oftentimes it just comes. And I am very surprised by the things that people express or the things that I say, or how suddenly we have these big revelations, both of us. And there is definitely something very divine guiding this space, which feels really nourishing as a holistic way of healing and holistic way of evolving spiritually and working with the themes that feel challenging and expanding into the parts that feel really good, and learning more about ourselves with both, for that to be a practice and a space that remembers spirit and honors spirit. That feels really true for me, and that seems to work for a lot of people too.
If someone is interested in maybe in working with you or interested in that, what do you think? What do you think would be something that they would come to you for? What's maybe like what would be the impetus in them to want to reach out to you?
I have worked with people who, for example, had a similar experiences to me, whether that's childhood abuse or substance abuse or eating disorders. I have had people work with me who reached out because of familiarity of shared experiences. I have had people reach out who have started working with plant medicines and felt that they would like to go deeper into their processes away from the space of plant medicines, but with someone who understands those realms or the way in which plants can operate. I have been working with people who have something really specific come up that they haven't been able to address in any other way, and feel that working with someone one-on-one and intentionally just addressing this one piece can be really useful. And I've also have had clients who simply just want to go deeper. There is nothing wrong or there's nothing difficult, but they want to be with someone who has experience of meditation, experience of somatic practices, experience of holding space. They resonate with me or feel safe with me and are curious to see what can open up in this container of self-inquiry, of meditation. Yeah, it really varies. And I have found so far that 99% of people that have found me, been recommended to me, know me already, that have started working with me in this format, there was a reason to that. And it was the most perfect combination of what they wanted to bring to the space and what I could offer them. I think because of there needing to be a two-part willingness and commitment to show up, I typically, before I commit to working with someone, would have a call with them, get to know them a little bit. I usually upfront ask them to fill a bunch of questions about what it is that they bring as an intention to even wanting to work with me, then have a call and really feel into whether this is a right fit. for both of us, because I really hold people accountable. And so while I'm excited to share and happy to hold space, I also am pretty straightforward, as you know me, and as others who know me know me. And so I want willingness from people to be ready to ask uncomfortable questions and be ready to get real and be ready to do their homework and be authentic and be vulnerable and, yeah, take the plunge, I guess. So it
Hmm.
really varies. And so far, there's only been really two instances where I felt like, okay, it's just really not the right fit. And I haven't worked with these people. And perhaps maybe one day we will try again, but it just didn't feel that it would be useful. Um, Other than that, it's always been really incredibly inspiring. And especially, I guess, for me, I think as space holders, we are the ones that really benefit from everything that we offer. Seems to be for us. Yeah.
Well, I had a former guest of ours reach out to me recently,
Hmm.
who I think you're mentoring, and
Hmm.
she spoke really highly of it. So, yeah,
Mm, great.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to have a platform to share with people, that isn't just retreats. And it's funny how it started a year ago or over a year ago. And right away I had people, and it was great. It was this new offering that I wanted to share, but immediately there were clients who were very interested. And over these 14 months, I have continuously have been mentoring people. However, in COVID and lockdown, it really blew up for me, and so many more people who have known me or have been recommended, um, from past retreat guests or other mentorees have come. And it's been a really interesting time of seeing how my work has evolved. And when we were talking so much about yoga, I was kind of internally laughing a little bit, thinking, wow, I really haven't taught a yoga class since, God, maybe a January when I had my retreat in Bali. Um, it seems that, yes, my path is just evolving somewhere else. And over these last 14 months, it was becoming more and more about working with people one-on-one. Most of all of my clients, it's a work done through Zoom. I have mentored some people face to face, but it's really international community. When all lockdown started and I had to cancel every single retreat for 2020, this became such a blessing to have this way of sharing, this way of serving, this way of being there for my community, and this way of also paying my bills, because it is also my livelihood. Um, so yes, I think I no longer really identify as a yoga teacher. I have started there, and over the years have become something else. And now also writing my book, I feel that once that's out, who knows, maybe the creation of this book and it being out there will open completely new doors, and I'll find myself giving TED Talks around the world, or I don't know, opening an ashram so everyone can come and bow.
You want to talk about your book at all, or is that still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in a process and in work in progress, let's put it that way. And I am feeling motivated to write because I have found someone who I would love to be my editor, because this is not only an editor but a person who has got great plant medicine and yoga experience. And that felt really important to me, to not have someone correct my English, my overly long sentences, but also understand what it actually is that I'm trying to convey, because they have touched that. And so I found this editor, and she is available from middle October. So I feel that I need to really get more writing down so that she can start working with me soon. But my book essentially is a weaving of a memoir of my journey, my trajectory, which can be summed up a journey from darkness to light, my realizations, my awakenings, my healings, my evolution, together with the teachings that I have been given and the ways in which I have benefited from sitting with different masters, different gurus, different teachers, whether that's in the jungle, whether that's in India, whether that's in my hometown or in London, in Europe. Because I felt along the way, especially once I started to really come back to myself once I got clean, that so much was given to me and I learned so much, and I was so blessed to sit with so many incredible teachers, and there is so much that wants to be shared and given back. So I want to tell my story because I feel that perhaps there is a lot of resonance in that story and it may help. And at the same time, I would like to share some of the teachings that I have received in different realms, the more humanly and not so humanly. And the main center point of my book is that there is medicine in everything. There is medicine in every bit of life if we are willing to acknowledge that. And that felt true to me. There is medicine in yoga. There has been medicine in my relationship with my father. There is medicine in India. There is medicine in the jungle. So I will be telling the stories of different medicines that have helped me come back to me. And I'm excited to share a lot of tools and self-inquiry questions, and hopefully make it not only a book of relatable stories, but also practices that can be utilized and harnessed and used on a daily basis for a life that feels a little bit more wholesome and connected and true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any idea about your future? I mean, obviously, with the pandemic, a lot of things are changing. Physically, things are changing.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas of where you'll be or how you'll be working or the manner in which you'll be working, or is everything
Mm-hmm.
just you're just kind of flowing with it and seeing where it goes?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. That I don't really know even how to try to begin to answer. However, it feels like an even greater invitation to walk my talk, to allow myself to be okay with the scale of uncertainty right now, globally and for me personally, and trust and trust and trust and trust. And that for me comes back to spirit, God, universe. There is something, someone that's taking care of me, that looks out for me, that with that, I know I will always be provided for, so I can trust. So I can lean into a permission to go with the flow more than the rigidity of control and needing to figure things out. So right now, I don't really know. We are currently in Portugal. We really love it here. The nature is stunning. We don't know just yet whether we will stay here or not. We have been thinking about this or another country in Europe. With my work, actually, I had a download today as we were driving through these beautiful mountains of Portugal that I would love to, whenever travel is possible, bring my spiritual mentorship work into the format of one-on-one retreats. So have people come into my space, which also means I don't have to build a retreat center. I can just have a guest house and a practice space. Have people come to work with me intensely one-on-one for, let's say, a week, and really create bespoke retreats based on individual texture and makeup of each of those students, guests, clients, and what they are going through and what's present for them and what they really need individually. And maybe bring plant medicine into that, or maybe just bring mind body practices. That feels really exciting, and that feels like it could be a beautiful way of bridging the world of working with people one on one and still having human contact that's not across the screen. I don't know whether I will be hosting group retreats anymore. Um, but who knows, maybe someday in the future. I'm open. Right now, I'm working on my book, I'm working on mentoring my clients and looking for houses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And looking at the mountain behind you and thinking, okay, Peru, that boat has sailed. How do I feel about it?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, great, Marta. Is there anything else you want to talk about? We're at about 2 hours.
Yeah, it feels really good. I just maybe want to add one thing. Perhaps a lot of people who do listen to you already have practices and will know or understand what I'm about to say. But for anyone, I feel that these times right now, this year, everything that's been happening, I understand it as an even greater call to get in touch with me and to remember to create a safe space for myself so that I can be fully aware of what's present. And so this is where for me practice is the most important thing to cultivate. And for anyone really, whether you're working 40 hours or having a freestyle life where you can do whatever you want, I feel that it's really important that we keep coming back into a place of self-inquiry. And especially when having a tendency to read or listen to lots of media, can we still carve out space to check in with how we are and how we're feeling? Because it's so easy to be overstimulated and overly informed and keep absorbing external content, and within that get completely confused about how we are and what do we need. And I find that when I'm struggling and when I'm feeling the greatest confusion is in the moments when I forgot to check in with myself. Okay, how is my breath? How is my body? And what do I need? And the practice, any practice, seems to remind me of that space and seems to give me answers to those questions and help me stay in touch with, okay, maybe what I need right now is to not be on my phone. And so what I actually have done is taken a month off from social media, and that feels really good to just not be receiving input 24/7. And so I just really want to encourage everyone to find a way to create maybe a little bit more room to be with ourselves so that it doesn't feel like the whole world is just gone crazy and we're in the middle of this crazy tornado and have zero control. I think we still very much can choose how we show up for that, and more spaciousness there is, the better equipped we are to show up for everything that arises.
Mm-hmm. Well, so
My
I've been
piece of
ending the
wisdom.
podcast with this question. You kind of answered it already in different ways, but what do you think these plants or these practices that you do, what do you think they're pointing towards? Or what are they trying to teach us?
To be present. I feel, for me, it feels to be present. Because when I am present, I am in this most immediate moment. And in this most immediate moment right now, everything is okay. Everything is okay. I am not in the events from the past, and I am not in some day in the future where apocalypse is coming. I'm here. Right now, everything is okay. So there's nothing to worry about. I can deal with whatever's arising, even if it's uncomfortable. And I am better equipped to connect with the magic of life and with that sweetness of spirit if I am just right here in my body, looking at nature, looking at the sky, feeling my breath. That's where I
Beautiful.
feel the spirit. That's where I feel God and me. Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
everyone can benefit from being present, whether we believe there to be spirit or God. It's really just, okay, can you take your breath? Feel it in your body and remember there's so much more than just what happens here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That was beautiful. And we're
Thank you.
we're gonna have your husband Al on pretty soon too. He
Yes.
he actually might even come out before you because we're putting this one on a delay a little bit until you're back online. So
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to
Yes.
talk to him too.
Yeah, it's great. And then someday our child, perfect, the whole family. Thank you so much. It was actually really nice to dive into yoga conversation. I haven't spoken with anyone about the magic of yoga for a while, so it felt really good to remember this is really what this practice is, and I love it so much.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Marta. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, I'll talk to you
Thank you
soon.
for having me. Talk to you soon. Bye.
So that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed talking and listening to Marta. I always do. She's a really fascinating human being. So that's it. We actually recorded this show a couple weeks before it's going to be released because she's actually offline for the month of September. So I'm not sure exactly who will be coming out after, But as always, I promise it'll be some really interesting guests. So that's it. As always, if you can go on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, go on Apple Podcasts, leave a starred rating and a review. That would be really beneficial. And also, if you're able to give back to the show at all through direct donation or Patreon, that would be deeply appreciated. Patreon's a really good way. You can subscribe for even just $1 a month. And there's different tiers, and you receive different things back: early access to episodes, bonus material, Q&As. So it's a really good way to give and also to get something back. So for all of you who have supported, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys are all doing well, and I'll see you on the next episode.